When my husband stepped away for a call, an old man slipped money into my hand and said, "Run." My name is Bernice, and I am 32 years old. 5 years ago, I married the man I thought was my forever. That night, we sat in the most beautiful restaurant in Denver celebrating our anniversary. Candles flickered, wine glasses sparkled. Everything looked perfect. But sometimes perfect is just a mask, and sometimes a stranger sees what you cannot. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear how one whispered word changed everything. I need to take you back to the beginning so you can understand how I ended up frozen in that restaurant, clutching money from a stranger and questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. I grew up in a small town outside of Boulder, Colorado. My parents were simple people. My father worked at a hardware store for 35 years. My mother taught elementary school until she retired. They showed me what love looked like through small gestures. Coffee made every morning without asking. A hand held during difficult conversations. Laughter shared over burnt dinners that nobody complained about. I grew up believing that love was patient. Love was kind, and love was honest. I carried those beliefs into my adult life, like a compass, guiding me toward my future. After college, I became an art teacher at a public high school in Denver. I loved my job more than I can express in words. There is something magical about watching a teenager discover that they can create something beautiful, that they have a voice, that their perspective matters. My classroom walls were covered with student artwork, abstract paintings, charcoal portraits, collages made from magazine clippings and fabric scraps. Every piece told a story. Every piece reminded me why I woke up excited to go to work each morning. I met Derek 7 years ago at a small art exhibition in downtown Denver. A friend had convinced me to display a few of my own paintings. I was nervous. Showing your art feels like showing your soul. People can praise it or criticize it, but either way, they are looking at something deeply personal. I stood near my paintings that evening, trying to look casual, while secretly watching every person who glanced in their direction. That is when I noticed him. Tall, dark hair with a slight wave that fell across his forehead. A navy blue suit that fit perfectly. He stood in front of my largest painting, a landscape of the Rocky Mountains at sunset, for what felt like a long time. I watched him study it with what appeared to be genuine interest. Then he turned and caught me looking. He smiled. Not a casual smile. A smile that reached his eyes and made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He walked over and introduced himself. Derek Harrison. A lawyer recently graduated working at a firm called Morrison & Partners. He told me he knew nothing about art, but that my painting made him feel peaceful. We talked for 2 hours. About art, about law, about our families and our dreams and our favorite restaurants in Denver. By the end of the night, he asked for my number and I gave it to him without hesitation. Our relationship moved quickly, but naturally. Derek was everything I had imagined in a partner. He sent me roses every Friday. He planned surprise weekend trips to mountain cabins. He remembered the names of my students and asked about their progress. He held doors open and pulled out chairs and looked at me like I was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, I said yes, before he even finished the question. Our wedding was small and intimate. Just family and close friends gathered in a garden venue outside of Denver. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and a simple white dress with lace sleeves. Derek cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. I remember thinking in that moment that I had found my person, my safe place, my forever. The first 3 years of marriage were happy. Derek worked long hours at the law firm, but he was climbing the ladder quickly. His bosses noticed his dedication. His clients praised his attention to detail. He was making a name for himself, and I was proud to stand beside him. I supported him in every way I could. I cooked dinners that were waiting when he came home late. I understood when he had to cancel plans because of work emergencies. I believed we were building something together. A foundation for a future family. A partnership that would last a lifetime. We bought a small house in the suburbs. White shutters. A front porch with 2 rocking chairs. A backyard where I planted lavender and roses and tomatoes. I spent weekends making it feel like a home. Painting the walls soft colors. Hanging artwork. Placing fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Derek would come home and wrap his arms around me and tell me how lucky he was. I believed him. Why would I not believe the man I loved? But then things began to shift. It happened so gradually that I almost did not notice at first. Looking back now, I can identify the exact moment things started to change. It was about 18 months before that night in the restaurant. Derek started working even longer hours, meetings that ran until midnight, business trips that lasted 3 or 4 days instead of overnight. His phone became an extension of his hand, always nearby, always face down on every surface. When I asked about his day, his answers grew shorter. Fine, busy. You would not understand. I told myself it was stress. I told myself he was working hard for our future. I told myself that all marriages go through seasons, and this was just a difficult one. I became an expert at making excuses for the distance growing between us, but the truth was they're hiding in plain sight. I was lonelier in my marriage than I had ever been as a single woman. I ate dinner alone most nights. I fell asleep alone most nights. I woke up alone most mornings because Derek had already left for the office. Still, I held on to hope. I believed that the man who cried at our wedding was still in there somewhere. I believed that if I just loved him enough, supported him enough, waited patiently enough, he would come back to me. That is why I was so excited when Derek suggested we celebrate our 5th anniversary at the Capitol Grill. It was the nicest restaurant in Denver, the kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who refill your water glass before you realize it is empty. Derek made the reservation himself. He told me to wear something beautiful. I chose a red dress that he had once said was his favorite. I spent extra time on my hair and makeup. I felt hopeful for the first time in months. This dinner felt like a turning point, a chance to reconnect, a chance to find our way back to each other. When we arrived at the restaurant, Derek was charming. He pulled out my chair. He ordered expensive wine. He told me I looked stunning. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything was going to be okay, that my marriage was not falling apart, that I had simply been paranoid about the distance I felt. We sat at a table near the window with a view of downtown Denver glittering under the night sky. The restaurant was elegant and intimate. Soft piano music played in the background. Other couples leaned toward each other in quiet conversation. I watched Derek across the table and felt a flutter of the love I used to feel so strongly. Maybe this was a new beginning. Maybe tonight would change everything. And it did change everything. Just not in the way I expected. Our conversation started light and pleasant. We talked about a movie we had seen recently, about my sister Marlene's upcoming visit from Los Angeles, about a student of mine who had just won an art scholarship. Derek seemed engaged at first, nodding in the right places, asking follow-up questions, but as the evening progressed, I noticed his attention drifting. His eyes kept sliding toward his phone on the table. His responses became shorter. He was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. I tried not to let it bother me. I reminded myself that he was under a lot of pressure at work. I told myself to be patient and enjoy the meal. The food was exquisite. Perfectly seared steak, roasted vegetables with herbs, a chocolate dessert that melted on my tongue. I focused on savoring each bite, on appreciating this rare evening out together. As I looked around the restaurant between courses, I noticed an elderly man sitting alone at the table next to ours. He appeared to be in his early 70s. His hair was white as snow thin and combed neatly to one side. He wore a suit jacket that looked well made, but old as if it had been his best suit for many years. His face was deeply lined, and there was something in his eyes that caught my attention. A heaviness. A sadness that seemed to weigh him down, even as he sat perfectly still. He had ordered only a glass of water and sat with his hands folded on the table, occasionally glancing around the room. I wondered about his story. Why was he dining alone at such an upscale restaurant? Was he waiting for someone who never arrived? Was he remembering anniversaries of his own from years past? There was something haunting about his solitude, but I quickly turned my attention back to Derek. Halfway through our main course, Derek's phone lit up. He glanced at the screen and I watched his expression change in a fraction of a second. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, concern, anticipation. He schooled his features quickly, but I had seen it. That tiny crack in his composure. He pushed back his chair and stood. "Excuse me, sweetheart. I need to take this call. Work emergency. I will be back in 5 minutes. Before I could respond, he was walking toward the exit phone pressed to his ear, his voice too low for me to hear. I sat alone at our anniversary table watching him disappear into the darkness outside the restaurant windows. The romantic glow of the evening dimmed. That familiar loneliness crept back into my chest. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip, trying to push away the disappointment. It was just a work call. He would be back soon. We would finish our dinner and go home, and everything would be fine. I repeated these reassurances like a prayer. That is when it happened. Movement caught my peripheral vision. The elderly man from the next table was standing. He moved with surprising quickness for someone his age. Before I could fully process what was happening, he was at my side. He reached down and took my hand in both of his. His skin was papery and cool, his grip gentle but urgent. I felt something press into my palm. Paper. Folded paper. Money. I looked up at him in confusion, my mouth opening to ask what he was doing. But before any words could form, he leaned close to my ear. So close that I could smell his aftershave, something old-fashioned and faintly floral. His breath was warm against my skin. He whispered one word. Just one word. But it cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a knife through silk. Run. Then he pulled back. His eyes met mine for one intense moment. They were pale blue, watery, with age, but sharp with something I could not name. Warning, pity, understanding, all of these, and none of these. Before I could speak or move or even breathe, he turned and walked away. Not toward his table, toward the back of the restaurant, toward a door I had not noticed before. He pushed through it and was gone, swallowed by whatever lay beyond. I sat frozen, completely frozen. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my throat. My hand was still extended, still holding whatever he had placed in my palm. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade away. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft piano. All of it became distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. Slowly, carefully, I looked down at my hand. 5 $100 bills folded neatly, and beneath them a small piece of paper folded once. My fingers trembled as I lowered my hand to my lap, hiding the money and the note beneath the tablecloth. I glanced around the restaurant. No one seemed to have noticed what happened. The other diners continued their meals, lost in their own conversations, their own lives. The waiters moved gracefully between tables, oblivious. Derek was still outside. I could see his silhouette through the window, pacing slowly, phone to his ear, gesturing with his free hand. I unfolded the note with shaking fingers. The handwriting was cramped and slightly unsteady, as if written by a hand that no longer had perfect control. Your husband is not who you think. Check the storage unit on Colfax Avenue, Unit 47. The key is taped under your mailbox. I am sorry. I was once like you. I read the words 3 times, 4 times. They did not make sense. They could not make sense. What storage unit? What key? Who was this man, and why did he know anything about my husband or my mailbox? I was once like you. What did that mean? Once like me, how a spouse, a victim. Oh, person who trusted someone they should not have trusted. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too crowded. I wanted to run after the old man and demand answers. I wanted to throw the money and the note away and pretend this never happened. I wanted to believe this was some kind of mistake, some confused elderly person who thought I was someone else. But deep in my gut, in that place where instinct lives, something whispered that this was not a mistake. Something whispered that this man knew exactly who I was, and exactly who Derek was. Something whispered that the life I thought I was living was built on lies. Derek came back through the door, sliding his phone into his jacket pocket. He smiled at me as he approached the table, that charming smile that had once made me melt. Sorry about that, he said, settling back into his chair. Where were we? I looked at him across the candlelit table, at his handsome face, his easy confidence, his complete lack of awareness that anything had changed in the minutes he was gone. And for the first time in our 7 years together, I wondered who I was really looking at. I slipped the money and the note into my purse beneath the table. I forced a smile. I said something about dessert or coffee or nothing important. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. But my mind was elsewhere. My mind was on Colfax Avenue, on Unit 47, on a key supposedly taped beneath my mailbox. When Derek suggested we go home, I agreed readily. He seemed pleased, perhaps thinking his anniversary dinner had been a success. He held my hand as we walked to the car. He kissed my cheek as he opened my door. I played my part perfectly. The loving wife, the grateful partner, the woman who suspected nothing. But inside I was already planning, already wondering, already terrified of what I might find. That night was the longest of my life. Derek fell asleep within minutes of getting home, his breathing settling into the steady rhythm of deep slumber. I lay beside him in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, the old man's words echoing in my head on an endless loop. Run! 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 I must have replayed the moment 1,000 times. His hand taking mine, the paper pressing into my palm, the intensity in his pale blue eyes, the way he disappeared through that back door like a ghost. None of it made sense, and yet some part of me believed every word he had not said. I thought about my marriage, about the distance that had grown between Derek and me over the past 1.5 years, the late nights, the changed passwords, the way his phone was never more than arm's length from his body. I had explained it all away. Work stress, career ambition, normal marriage struggles. But what if there was another explanation? What if the explanation was something I could not have imagined in my worst nightmares? Sleep never came. By the time pale gray light began seeping through the curtains, I had made my decision. I had to know. Whatever was in that storage unit, whatever secrets that key would unlock, I needed to see it for myself. Living in uncertainty was no longer an option. Derek's alarm went off at 6:30. He stretched, kissed my forehead, and shuffled toward the shower. I lay still, pretending to be half asleep until I heard the bathroom door close and the water start running. Then I was up and moving. I pulled on jeans and a sweater. I grabbed my purse with the money and note still inside. I crept downstairs and out the front door before Derek finished his shower. The morning air was crisp and cold, typical for Denver in early autumn. My breath made small clouds as I walked to the mailbox at the end of our driveway. My heart pounded as I reached underneath. The metal was cold against my fingers as I searched blindly along the bottom surface. For a terrible moment I thought there would be nothing there, that the old man had been confused, or lying, or simply insane. Then my fingers touched something. Tape. And beneath the tape, a small metal object. A key. I peeled it away from the mailbox and held it in my palm. It was an ordinary key. Silver. Small. The kind that might open a padlock or a storage unit door. Nothing special about it. And yet, holding it felt like holding a bomb. I heard the shower shut off inside the house. I had minutes at most before Derek came downstairs looking for breakfast. I shoved the key into my pocket and hurried back inside, moving through the kitchen as if I had simply been making coffee. When Derek came downstairs 15 minutes later, dressed in his suit and ready for work, I was standing at the counter holding a mug picture of innocence. "Have a good day," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too bright, too cheerful. Derek kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and headed out the door. I watched from the window as his car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. I waited 10 more minutes to make sure he was truly gone. Then I grabbed my car keys and left. Colfax Avenue is one of the longest streets in America, stretching across Denver and beyond. The storage facility the note mentioned was on the east side, past downtown, in a neighborhood of auto repair shops and pawn stores and motels with weekly rates. The building was squat and industrial, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A faded sign announced self-storage units available. I parked in the small lot and sat in my car for several minutes, trying to steady my breathing. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home, to throw away the key and the note, and pretend none of this had ever happened. To trust my husband and believe in my marriage, and continue living the life I thought I had built. But I could not unknow what I now suspected. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it had taken root overnight. I needed answers more than I needed comfort. I got out of the car and walked through the entrance gate. The facility was a maze of identical metal doors, each marked with a painted number. I wandered through the rows until I found Unit 47. It looked like all the others. A roll-up door secured with a padlock. Nothing special. Nothing that suggested secrets or betrayal or shattered lives. The key slid into the padlock smoothly. It turned with a click. The padlock fell open in my hand. I stood there for a long moment, frozen again, just as I had been at the restaurant. Behind this door was either nothing, some innocent explanation that would make me feel foolish for doubting my husband, or behind this door was everything, every lie, every deception, every truth I had been too blind or too trusting to see. I reached down and grabbed the handle. I pulled up. The door rolled open with a screech of metal on metal. Inside the unit was dim. I fumbled along the wall until I found a light switch. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing the contents of the storage space. It was not empty. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the walls. A small folding table sat in the center with a laptop on its surface. Filing cabinets lined the back wall. None of this belonged to me. None of this had I ever seen before. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The air smelled stale and slightly musty, as if no one had been here in weeks. I approached the nearest stack of boxes and pulled one down. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the table and lifted the lid. Inside were folders. Dozens of folders, each stuffed with documents. I pulled one out and began to read. Legal papers, financial statements, bank account records, names I did not recognize, numbers that made my head spin. I pulled out another folder. More of the same. Contracts, wire transfer confirmations, letters from banks in the Cayman Islands. This was not personal storage. This was evidence of something much larger. Something organized. Something deliberate. Then I found a folder with my name on it. Bernice Harrison. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents I had never seen. Loan applications with my signature at the bottom. Credit agreements listing me as a co-signer. Guarantor forms for amounts that made my stomach turn. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Borrowed in my name. Guaranteed by my identity. But I had never signed these documents. I had never agreed to any of this. I had never even heard of the companies named in these papers. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had used my identity. And that someone had access to my personal information. My social security number, my everything. There was only one person who had that kind of access to my life. I sank into the folding chair, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. The room spun around me. This could not be happening. This had to be a nightmare from which I would soon wake. But the papers in my hands were real. The ink was real. The amounts were real. I forced myself to keep looking. I pulled down more boxes, found more evidence. Receipts for jewelry I had never received. Hotel reservations in cities I had never visited. Credit card statements for an American Express account I did not own showing charges at designer stores and five-star restaurants. And then I found the photographs. They were in a manila envelope tucked into the back of a filing cabinet drawer. I slid them out and spread them across the table. Derek, my husband, smiling in each picture, but not with me. The woman beside him in the photographs was younger than me, maybe 28 or 29. Blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, designer clothes, a smile that spoke of confidence and comfort in front of the camera. In some pictures they were on a beach, in others at a restaurant, in one standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, in another lounging by a pool at some tropical resort. There was a picture of her hand extended toward the camera, showing off a diamond ring that glittered in the sunlight. An engagement ring. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred with tears I could not stop. The man in these photographs was my husband. The same man who had told me he loved me this morning. The same man who had kissed my cheek and said he would see me for dinner. The same man who had promised to be faithful to me for the rest of his life. He had another woman, another life, another everything. And according to the documents scattered around me, he had stolen from countless people to fund it all. And when everything collapsed, when the authorities caught up with him, I would be the one left holding the blame. My name was on all the papers. My signature forged, but impossible to prove otherwise. I would be the face of this fraud, while he disappeared with his blonde girlfriend and their ill-gotten fortune. I sat alone in that storage unit for a long time. I do not know how long. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The boxes surrounded me like witnesses to my devastation. And for those minutes or hours I let myself feel everything. The shock, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the fury. I had loved this man completely. I had built my life around him. I had believed every word he ever spoke to me, and it was all a lie. Every single piece of it. When I finally emerged from that storage unit, I was a different woman than the one who had walked in. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. The Bernice who trusted blindly, who explained away warning signs, who wanted to believe the best in people, even when evidence suggested otherwise, that Bernice was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone determined, someone who understood that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. I did not go home right away. I could not face that house, our house, where I had been so naive and so happy in my ignorance. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop downtown and sat in a corner booth with a cup of tea I did not drink. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to figure out what to do next. My first instinct was to confront Derek, to throw the photographs in his face and demand answers, to scream and cry and make him feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing through my chest. But what would that accomplish? He would lie. He would manipulate. He was clearly a professional at deception. I would gain nothing from an emotional confrontation except tipping him off that I knew his secrets. My second instinct was to run, to take the $500 the old man had given me and disappear, start over somewhere else, leave Derek to whatever fate awaited him and remove myself from the equation entirely. But that would not work either. My name was on those documents. My forged signature guaranteed those loans. If I ran, I would look guilty. I would become a fugitive from crimes I did not commit. No, running was not an option, and neither was confrontation. I needed something else entirely. I needed justice. I pulled out my phone and called my sister Marlene in Los Angeles. Marlene is 3 years older than me and has always been the practical one in the family. While I pursued art and teaching, she pursued law. She works for a large firm in LA that handles corporate litigation and white-collar crime. If anyone would know what to do in this situation, it was Marlene. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and professional. "Bernice, what a nice surprise." "How are you?" I took a deep breath. "I need your help. Something has happened. Something bad." The brightness in her voice evaporated immediately. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "Not physically, but Marlene, I found something. About Derek. I need to tell you everything, but it has to be secure. Can you go somewhere private? Give me 2 minutes." I heard rustling footsteps, a door closing. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet and focused. "Tell me." So I told her. Everything. The old man at the restaurant. The note and the money. The key under the mailbox. The storage unit with its boxes of damning evidence. The forged documents with my name. The photographs of Derek with another woman. I told her all of it in one long, breathless rush, afraid that if I stopped, I would not be able to start again. Marlene listened without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was the voice of a lawyer, not a sister. Calm, analytical, ready to act. "Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior at all. You need to act completely normal while we figure this out. Can you do that? Yes, I can do that. Good. I am going to make some calls. I have a contact at the FBI who handles financial crimes. If what you are describing is accurate, this is much bigger than one bad husband. This is organized fraud, possibly involving multiple people at his firm. We need professionals involved. I thought about the name Morrison, Derek's boss. The documents had suggested he was involved too. This was not just Derek acting alone. This was an operation. Marlene continued, I need you to do something for me. Can you go back to that storage unit and photograph everything, every document, every folder, every piece of evidence? Send it all to me through a secure channel. I will set up an encrypted email for you. I can do that. One more thing, Bernice. Do you know who the old man was? The one who gave you the money and the note, no. He disappeared before I could ask anything. See if you can find out. If he knew enough to warn you, he knew enough to have a history with these people. He might be a previous victim. His testimony could be crucial. I thought about his words. I was once like you. Marlene was right. He was not a random stranger. He was connected to this somehow. He had suffered something similar, and he had cared enough to reach out to me despite whatever risks that posed for him. After hanging up with Marlene, I drove back to the storage unit. I spent 3 hours photographing every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence I could find. My phone filled with hundreds of images. I sent them all to the encrypted email address Marlene had set up. Then I searched more carefully through the boxes looking for anything that might identify the old man. I found it in the back of a filing cabinet drawer, a folder marked Patterson Case 2018. Inside was a paper trail documenting the financial destruction of Harold and Margaret Patterson. Bank accounts drained, retirement funds vanished, property seized to cover fraudulent debts. A married couple in their 60s stripped of everything they had spent a lifetime building.
There was a death certificate clipped to the back of the folder. Margaret Patterson. Cause of death, suicide. I sat down heavily. The old man, Harold Patterson. His wife had killed herself after they were destroyed by Derek and Morrison and whoever else was involved in this operation. He had lost everything. His money, his home, his wife. And somehow, despite his own devastation, he had found the strength to warn me, to slip $500 into my hand and tell me to run. But he had not been telling me to run away. He had been telling me to run toward the truth, to escape the trap before it closed completely, to save myself in a way that his wife could not save herself. I found a phone number written on the inside cover of the Patterson file. I dialed it with trembling fingers. It rang 4 times, and then a familiar voice answered. Careful. Cautious. Hello, Mr. Patterson. Harold Patterson. Silence on the other end? Then is this the woman from the restaurant? Yes.
Bernice, you warned me. You told me to run. A long exhale. I was not sure you would look. Most people do not want to see the truth about someone they love. I saw everything. The storage unit, the documents, the photographs. I saw what they did to you and your wife. I am so sorry. His voice cracked slightly. Margaret was the love of my life. We were married 43 years. After we lost everything, she could not go on. The shame, the poverty, the feeling of being foolish, of being tricked by people who smiled to our faces. It broke her. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. How did you know about me? How did you know I was next? I have spent the last 6 years watching them. Morrison and partners. Your husband. That woman, Kristen. I could not prove anything on my own. No one believed me. I was just a crazy old man ranting about a conspiracy. But I kept watching. I learned their patterns. I saw when they targeted new victims, and when I saw you at that restaurant so trusting, so unaware, I saw Margaret. I saw her before she knew, and I could not let it happen again without doing something. You saved my life, Mr. Patterson. You saved my future. Call me Harold. And I did not save anything yet. They are still out there. They are still planning to disappear and leave you to take the blame. Not anymore. My sister is a lawyer. She has FBI contacts. I have photographs of everything in that storage unit. We are going to stop them. Silence again. Then very quietly, can I help? Yes, Harold. You can help. You are the key to all of this. I returned home that afternoon with a plan taking shape in my mind. Marlene had connected me with FBI Special Agent Sandra Coleman, who had been investigating Morrison and Partners for 2 years without enough evidence to make arrests. My photographs from the storage unit were exactly what she needed. But she needed more. She needed someone on the inside. She needed me to keep pretending while gathering additional evidence. So I became an actress. The performance of my life. When Derek came home from work that evening, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss on the cheek. I asked about his day. I served the dinner I had prepared. I laughed at his jokes and listened to his stories and never once let him see the fury burning beneath my surface. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Sitting across from a man I now knew to be a monster and pretending I still loved him. Sleeping beside him at night while mentally cataloging every lie he told. Watching him check his phone and knowing he was texting another woman. Hearing him say, "I love you," and understanding that those words meant nothing. But I did it. Night after night. Day after day. For 2 weeks I played the devoted wife while secretly gathering evidence. I started paying attention to details I had previously ignored. When Derek had work calls, I noted the times and durations. When he left for business trips, I photographed his luggage. I discovered where he hid his second phone, the one he thought I did not know about, and memorized the passcode by watching him enter it in a reflection. When he was in the shower, I scrolled through messages to a contact saved as K love notes, plans for their future, discussions about how they would live in Belize after everything was done. I learned about their timeline. They were planning to move the last of their stolen funds in 2 weeks. After that, Derek would manufacture a fight with me, file for divorce, and disappear overseas before anyone realized what had happened. I would be left holding the evidence, my forged signatures on every document, while he started a new life with Kristen under new identities. I photographed everything and sent it to Agent Coleman. I recorded conversations when I could do so legally. I documented every movement, every pattern, every piece of the puzzle. Harold became my partner in this investigation. We met at a coffee shop across town once a week, sharing information and support. He provided context about Morrison and Partners that I could not have learned anywhere else. He knew the names of other victims. He understood how the scheme worked. He had spent 6 years studying these people, waiting for an opportunity to bring them down. I was that opportunity. Marlene flew in from Los Angeles to help coordinate our efforts. She stayed at a hotel rather than at my house, never letting Derek know she was in town. We communicated through encrypted channels. We built our case piece by piece. Agent Coleman was cautious, but encouraging. She warned me that we needed more than documents. We needed admissions. We needed Derek and Morrison to say things that clearly implicated them in the fraud. Without that, a clever lawyer might be able to create reasonable doubt. I had an idea. The plan was simple, but risky. I would host a dinner at our house to celebrate Derek's upcoming promotion. Morrison would be invited as an honored guest. I would serve wine and food and create an atmosphere of celebration and relaxation. And throughout the evening, hidden cameras and microphones placed by the FBI would capture every word. Derek was delighted when I suggested the dinner. He saw it as further proof that I was the perfect unsuspecting wife supporting his career while remaining blind to his true activities. He kissed my forehead and called me wonderful. I smiled and said I wanted to do something special for him. The night arrived. I had spent the entire day preparing. The house was immaculate. The table was set with our best dishes. Candles glowed softly. Music played quietly in the background. Everything looked perfect. Derek and Morrison arrived together. Morrison was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a confident manner. He complimented the house, praised the dinner arrangements, and treated me with the kind of condescending warmth that powerful men often show to women they consider unimportant. I played my role perfectly. I refilled wine glasses. I laughed at their jokes. I asked naive questions about their work. And slowly, carefully, I guided the conversation toward topics that would be useful. The wine helped. As the evening progressed, both men became looser, more confident, more willing to speak freely. They made jokes about their clueless clients. They referenced the upcoming transfer with winks and nods. They spoke in code that would be clear enough once matched with the documentary evidence. Then Morrison made a comment that sealed everything. He looked at me with that patronizing smile and said, "You are a lucky woman, Bernice. Your husband is a genius. In another 2 weeks, he will be able to give you everything you ever dreamed of." He raised his glass. "To the lambs who fund our lifestyle." Derek laughed and clinked glasses with his boss. "To the lambs." I smiled and raised my own glass, hiding the revulsion that churned in my stomach. They were toasting their victims. They were celebrating stolen lives and shattered dreams. And they had no idea that their words were being recorded, that their crimes were being documented, that their freedom was about to end. The doorbell rang. Derek looked confused. "We were not expecting anyone." "I will get it," I said. I walked to the front door and opened it to find Agent Coleman standing on my porch with 4 other FBI agents behind her. They wore bulletproof vests. They held warrants. "Is this the residence of Derek Harrison?" "Yes. He is inside." I stepped aside. The agents moved past me into the house. I heard Morrison's voice rise in confusion, then Derek's voice sharpen with alarm. There were shouts, commands, the sounds of men being ordered to the ground. I walked back into the dining room. Derek was on his knees, hands behind his head, an agent standing over him with handcuffs ready. Morrison was in the same position beside him. Both men looked at me with shock that slowly transformed into understanding. Agent Coleman was reading them their rights: financial fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy. The list went on and on. Derek found his voice. "Bernice. Bernice, what is this I do not understand? Help me. Tell them this is a mistake." I walked toward him slowly. I stopped just a few feet away and looked down at the man I had married, the man I had loved, the man who had planned to destroy my life without a second thought. "I know everything, Derek. The storage unit, the fake loans in my name, Kristen, the plan to disappear and let me take the blame. I know all of it." His face went pale. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. For once in his life, Derek Harrison had nothing to say. "You asked me once why I fell in love with you," I continued. "I said it was because you made me feel safe. You made me feel like I could trust you with anything. But you were never safe, were you? You were just a very good liar. And now your lies are over. Bernice, please. I can explain. It is not what you think." Agent Coleman stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison. Mr. Morrison, you are under arrest. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." They were lifted to their feet. Handcuffs were secured. As they were led toward the door, Derek twisted to look back at me one last time. "I never loved her," he said desperately. "Kristen meant nothing. You are my wife. I love you." I stared at him without expression. I felt nothing. No anger, no grief, no satisfaction. Just emptiness where love used to live. "You never loved anyone but yourself, Derek. And now you are going to have a very long time to think about what that cost you." They took him away. I watched through the window as the FBI cars pulled out of my driveway, red and blue lights flashing in the darkness. And then they were gone. I stood alone in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of the dinner party. The candles still flickered. The music still played. The wine glasses still held their dregs. Marlene emerged from the kitchen where she had been waiting with Agent Coleman's team. She put her arms around me and held me tight. "It is over," she said. "You did it. It is over." I let myself lean into her embrace, and for the first time since the old man whispered "run" in my ear, I allowed myself to cry. In the months that followed, the justice system moved slowly but surely. Derek and Morrison were both held without bail considered flight risks, given the evidence of their plans to flee the country. Kristen was arrested a week later at an airport in Miami, trying to board a plane to Belize alone, when she realized the men were not coming. The trial was long and painful. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the documents, the photographs, the recordings. Harold testified too, finally given the opportunity to tell his story to people who believed him. Other victims came forward. The pattern of fraud stretched back over a decade. Dozens of families destroyed. Millions of dollars stolen. Derek was convicted on 27 counts. Morrison on 31. They were both sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Kristen received 15 years for her role as an accomplice. None of them will be free until they are old if they live that long. The court ordered restitution to the victims. It was not enough to restore what had been taken, but it was something. Harold received compensation that allowed him to move from the small apartment where he had been living into a modest but comfortable house with a garden where he grows tomatoes and thinks about his wife. As for me, I sold the house in the suburbs. I could not stay there surrounded by memories of a marriage that was nothing but lies. I bought a small apartment closer to downtown, near the school where I teach. I painted the walls bright colors and hung artwork from my students and filled the space with plants and light. The first few months were brutal. I went to therapy twice a week. I processed the trauma of betrayal, the grief of losing not just a husband, but an entire version of reality I had believed was true. I learned to trust myself again, to listen to my instincts, to recognize red flags I had once ignored. My friendship with Harold became one of the most important relationships in my life. We have dinner together every Sunday. He tells me stories about Margaret and I listen with my whole heart. He has become the father figure I never knew I needed, wise and gentle and fiercely protective. When I told him once that he saved my life, he shook his head and said I had saved his. I gave him a reason to keep fighting when he had almost given up. Marlene and I are closer than we have ever been. She visits from Los Angeles every few months, and we take trips together to places we always talked about, but never went. The Grand Canyon, New Orleans, the coast of Maine. We are making up for lost time, building a sisterhood that distance had weakened. I am not the same woman I was before that night in the restaurant. I am stronger, but I am also more cautious. I am braver, but I am also more aware of the darkness that can hide behind charming smiles. I know now that trust must be earned slowly, and that intuition is a gift that should never be ignored. I have not dated since the divorce was finalized. I am not ready. Maybe I will be someday, or maybe I will discover that I am complete on my own. Either way, I have stopped looking for someone else to make me feel whole. I am learning to be whole by myself. Sometimes I think about the old man's single whispered word, run. At first I thought it was a warning to escape, to flee, to get away from danger as fast as I could. But now I understand it differently. Harold was not telling me to run away from something. He was telling me to run toward something. Toward truth. Toward freedom. Toward a life that was truly mine. If you are watching this and you feel something is wrong in your relationship, trust that feeling. If someone's behavior does not match their words, pay attention. If a stranger ever shows you unexpected kindness that seems to come from nowhere, consider that they might see something you cannot see yet. I was once a woman who ignored every warning sign because I wanted so badly to believe in love. I almost lost everything because of that willful blindness. But I was given a second chance by a grieving old man who saw himself in my situation and refused to let history repeat itself. So here is my question for you. Have you ever had a moment when a stranger changed your life? When someone you did not know saw something you could not see and helped you anyway? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. We all have these moments if we look back carefully enough. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival and strength. And remember, no matter what you are going through, you have more power than you know. You just have to choose to use it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And may you always have the courage to run toward your truth, whatever that might be.